Three of the world's most powerful militaries sent their finest soldiers to the same operation in Afghanistan. Two of them handpicked their absolute best, drawn from across their entire military establishments, through ruthless, competitive selection processes. Every soldier chosen was a proven performer. Every single one had been identified as elite. They trained together. They prepared together. They were sent as the finest their nations could produce. The third nation? They sent whoever was next in the rotation. No special selection. No curated list of peak performers. Just the soldiers who happened to be next in line, drawn from the regular cycle of the British Special Air Service. And when the operation unfolded in the mountains of Afghanistan, when the terrain got brutal, the targets went live, and decisions had to be made in seconds, something happened that left the commanders of those two elite, hand-picked units standing in stunned silence. The British soldiers, the ones nobody had specially chosen, were performing at a level the other two units couldn't match, even at their absolute peak. This is the story of what that operation revealed. Not just about the SAS, but about what it truly means to build an elite military force. And why most nations are doing it wrong. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will completely change the way you look at special operations warfare. Welcome back to British Military Chronicles, the channel that goes beyond the headlines to bring you the real stories of British military history, courage, and capability. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now. Now, let's get into it. By the middle years of the Afghanistan campaign, the idea of coalition warfare had become central to everything. This wasn't just an American war. It wasn't simply a Western intervention. It was framed, deliberately and carefully, as a shared commitment, an expression of allied solidarity among multiple nations united by a common purpose. And when this particular operation was conceived, three nations were brought together to execute it. Each was a serious military power. Each brought its own doctrine, its own culture, its own institutional identity to the table. The operation itself was demanding. It required personnel insertion into difficult, unforgiving terrain. It required sophisticated land navigation, the kind of map reading and environmental awareness that separates trained soldiers from truly elite ones. It required tactical maneuvers executed under pressure, within a constrained operational window, against an enemy that didn't care about anyone's preparation timelines. The stakes were real. The terrain was brutal. The climate was harsh. And every decision made in the field would have consequences. So how did three of the world's most capable militaries choose to staff this operation? That's where the story gets interesting. The first nation approached the deployment the way serious military establishments approach high-stakes operations. They went across their entire armed forces and identified the top performers. Not the soldiers who happened to be next in line. Not the units whose rotation schedule aligned with the calendar. The best. The highest evaluated, most combat-proven, most capable personnel their military could identify. These individuals, proven in previous deployments, decorated by their peers, recognized by their commanders, were pulled from their units, gathered together, and transformed into a cohesive fighting element. They trained specifically for this mission. Unit cohesion was emphasized. Shared understanding was developed from scratch. The message sent by this nation to its partners was clear: we have invested our resources, our time, and our institutional energy to send you our very finest. The second nation followed an identical philosophy. Their selection process was equally deliberate and equally competitive. Individuals who stood out among their peers, who demonstrated exceptional capability across multiple dimensions of military performance, were identified and assembled. They trained together. They developed familiarity. They built the kind of trust that complex operations demand. And they deployed with a full understanding of what this mission represented and why they had been specifically chosen for it. Both nations had done something hard and something meaningful. They had looked across their entire military establishment and made a conscious organizational choice: rather than deploying whoever was next in the rotation, they would invest the time, money, and institutional effort to send a curated, specifically prepared elite team. It was a statement of commitment. It was a statement of seriousness. And by every conventional military standard, it was the right call. Britain approached the matter differently. The British forces assigned to support this operation, specifically the British Special Operations Contingent, were drawn from the ongoing rotation of the Special Air Service. The SAS operates on a well-established rotation schedule. Units from Hereford, the home of the regiment, deploy on a regular, pre-planned cycle as part of Britain's broader military commitment to coalition operations. Personnel are assigned to each rotation through standard military practice. Soldiers complete a deployment, return to the regiment, undergo refresher training and capability maintenance, and are then assigned to the next scheduled rotation. The cycle operates on a timeline established years in advance, based on operational tempo assumptions and personnel availability patterns. There was no meeting at Hereford where senior commanders studied the upcoming coalition operation and asked, "Who are our best? Who should we specifically send for this?" That conversation simply did not happen, because it was not necessary. The rotation operated according to its schedule. The operation's significance was acknowledged, the regiment ensured its deployed personnel were in proper shape and operationally ready, but the fundamental organizing principle was unchanged. The rotation went as scheduled. The distinction between these two approaches is striking and it deserves to be understood clearly. The first two nations selected their best through a deliberate, top-down curation process. They identified peak performers. They gathered them. They trained them as a team. The SAS deployed whoever was next in rotation, whoever the schedule produced at that moment in time. And yet, when those three forces came together in the mountains of Afghanistan, the performance that followed told a story that nobody present would ever forget. The performance differential didn't take long to appear. Within the first hours of the operation, as units began to move into position, patterns became visible to anyone paying attention. The American unit, selected with care, trained specifically for this deployment, performed at a genuinely high level. Their movements were coordinated. Their decisions were efficient. They advanced toward the objective with professionalism and competence. When the plan shifted or unexpected obstacles appeared, they adapted. Every contingency had been practiced. Every element had been accounted for. This was an elite unit operating the way an elite unit should operate. The second Allied unit, also curated, also specifically trained, performed equally well. Their movement was efficient. Their response to contingencies was professional. Their coordination with partner forces was solid. Both specially selected units were doing exactly what they had been assembled and prepared to do. Then there was the British contingent. They weren't better in the way that makes for dramatic footage, no single moment of extraordinary heroism, no singular display of superhuman capability. The difference was subtler than that, and because of that subtlety, it was more revealing. Where the selected units showed excellence, the British showed it as routine. Movements that the other units executed with careful deliberation, the British executed with apparent ease. Decisions that required coordination and consultation from the other units, the British made quickly and confidently. Technical competence, in marksmanship, navigation, tactical movement, situational awareness, was measurably and consistently higher across every element of the operation. The observers on the ground understood exactly what they were seeing. And what they were seeing was this: the British unit's baseline capability exceeded the peak capability the other nations had achieved through deliberate, intensive curation. That is not a small thing. That is an extraordinary thing. The story wasn't told in one dramatic moment. It was told in dozens of small details that accumulated into an undeniable picture. Navigation. During the movement phase, the American and Allied units moved through the terrain with careful, professional attention to maps and GPS devices. Personnel followed identified terrain features, checked positions against map references, and advanced cautiously. Their commanders actively coordinated movement over the radio, verified positions, and synchronized the overall tactical plan. It was methodical. It was professional. And it imposed a pace penalty, the natural cost of ensuring that a newly assembled force stayed coordinated and synchronized through unfamiliar terrain. The British contingent moved through the same terrain with a different rhythm entirely. Navigation appeared almost intuitive. Personnel oriented themselves without apparent deliberation. The pace was faster, not reckless, but confidently faster. Terrain features that other personnel had to locate on a map and then identify on the ground, the British seemed to recognize almost instinctively. Routing decisions that required consultation from other commanders appeared to flow naturally from an accumulated, deep understanding of how terrain works and how experienced soldiers move through it. There was no second-guessing. No visible uncertainty. No coordination overhead. What required deliberation for others appeared automatic for the British. Marksmanship and target engagement. When the units moved into firing positions and began engaging designated targets, the performance gap became even more visible. The American unit engaged with discipline and care. Personnel established good firing positions, maintained controlled shot placement, and achieved high accuracy. Their methodology was sound and conservative, appropriate for a newly assembled force operating in a complex tactical environment where the cost of mistakes is high. The Allied unit matched this standard. Both units hit their targets. Both units conducted themselves professionally. The British engagement of targets was different, not because their accuracy was dramatically superior, but because of the speed and apparent effortlessness with which it was achieved. Where American personnel took perhaps 3 to 5 seconds to establish a firing position and prepare to engage, British personnel appeared to engage in 1 to 2 seconds. The targets were hit. The suppressive fire was effective. But the British were not working at the edge of their capability. They were operating well within it. The shooting appeared reflexive, the kind of deeply practiced action that no longer requires conscious deliberation. Hundreds of hours of training compressed into a movement so familiar it had become automatic. Obstacle handling. At one point during the movement phase, the British element encountered a terrain obstacle. Rather than halting to plan around it or requesting coordination from adjacent units, they simply found an efficient route and kept moving. The American unit, encountering the same feature, spent several minutes analyzing approach options, coordinating with adjacent elements, and ensuring the movement wouldn't disrupt the formation. Both responses were professional. One was measurably faster. And that margin, multiplied across dozens of small decisions across the duration of the operation, accumulated into something significant. By the time the operation concluded, everyone present understood that something important had been demonstrated. And it raised a question that couldn't be ignored. The American unit had been specifically selected and specifically trained for this operation. The Allied unit had undergone the same process. By the standards of their respective nations, these were elite forces, the absolute best those militaries could produce through intensive, deliberate curation. And yet, when placed alongside personnel drawn from the regular deployment rotation of the British SAS, they appeared to be operating at a lower level of baseline capability. How is that possible? The answer resides in the nature of the SAS regiment itself, and in what it represents as an organizational model. The SAS is not an organization that contains elite personnel alongside non-elite personnel. It is an organization in which elite is the baseline. Not a destination. Not an achievement. The baseline. The thing that distinguishes membership from the moment selection is passed. The regiment does not recruit soldiers and then train them to become elite. It selects people who already possess the mindset and the foundational capability required, and then places them inside a culture and a training environment that reinforces and continuously strengthens that standard, relentlessly, without compromise, year after year. That distinction matters enormously. The SAS selection process is among the most demanding military selection courses in the world. And understanding what it does, and why, is essential to understanding the performance that was witnessed during this operation. Candidates for the SAS endure weeks of physical, psychological, and mental pressure designed to eliminate the vast majority who attempt it. They navigate remote, demanding terrain carrying heavy loads. They endure cold. They endure hunger. They endure exhaustion. They continue to function and make sound decisions when their bodies and minds are screaming at them to stop. But the selection course is not designed to find the strongest or the fastest. That's a crucial distinction. It is designed to find those with the greatest determination and the greatest capacity to keep going when everything else has failed. Candidates are pushed beyond what they believe are their physical limits, not to assess them under controlled conditions, but to find their breaking point and watch what happens when they're pushed past it. The people who pass are those who have undergone a fundamental psychological reorientation. They have learned, through genuine experience rather than classroom instruction, that their perceived limits are psychological constructs, not physical realities. They have proven to themselves that they can endure far more than they thought possible. And that knowledge, that deeply personal, experiential knowledge, changes everything about how they operate under pressure afterwards. When they encounter a difficult situation in the field, they do not panic. They do not despair. They draw on the certainty that they have already survived worse and kept moving. That changes decision-making. It changes reaction time. It changes everything. But selection is only the beginning. The regiment maintains relentless standards of continuous assessment and training. Personnel in the SAS do not coast on the achievement of passing selection. That achievement grants entry. It does not guarantee tenure. Marksmanship training is continuous. Personnel shoot regularly, maintain their weapons, and constantly work toward higher accuracy and faster engagement speeds. Navigation training is maintained through regular exercises in unfamiliar terrain. Tactical training evolves as enemy tactics and operational doctrine evolve. The regiment invests enormously, in range time, in training facilities, in experienced instructors, to keep its personnel sharp, current, and operating at the highest possible standard. And the standard is enforced. Personnel who allow their capability to decline are counseled. If performance does not improve, they face removal from the regiment, return to their unit of origin. This is not a theoretical threat. It happens. And the possibility of losing SAS status is significant enough that it motivates a sustained culture of personal excellence. Nobody in the regiment wants to be the soldier who let their standard slip. The culture that develops from this structure is difficult to overstate. Personnel operate in an environment where excellence is not just expected, it is the non-negotiable condition of continued membership. The pay, the prestige, the identity, the privilege of being part of a unit with the SAS history and capability, all of it depends on maintaining standards that do not flex. The discipline is rigorous. But it is self-discipline, backed by organizational structures that give it teeth. Regular evaluations. Continuous assessment. A standard that applies every day, not just during deployment. An SAS soldier deployed on regular rotation has passed one of the world's most demanding selection courses. He has trained continuously since that day. He lives and operates within a culture where excellence is the default expectation, not the aspirational target. When the regiment deploys personnel, it is drawing from a population where elite baseline performance is the normal output. The contrast between the two approaches reveals something fundamental about how military organizations, and by extension, organizations of any kind, think about excellence. The approach used by the American and Allied units treats elite as a destination. You identify top performers from a broader population. You assemble them. You train them intensively. You bring them to a peak and deploy them. This approach has real advantages. It makes economical use of training resources, concentrates investment where it will have operational effect, and allows an organization to field elite capabilities without maintaining a permanently large elite force. But it has an inherent ceiling. The peak achievable through intensive curation of an ad hoc team is constrained by the baseline capabilities of the personnel being assembled and by the time available for their integration. If personnel are being drawn from a broader military population, where not everyone has been filtered through demanding selection and sustained assessment, the training period must compensate for baseline differences among the selected individuals. The starting point matters. You can only build so high from a given foundation, regardless of how intensive your training program is. The SAS model represents something fundamentally different. It suggests that an organization itself can be structured so that its baseline output is elite, not its peak output, its baseline output. Rather than selecting from across the military and curating for individual operations, the regiment filters candidates through a demanding selection process, places them in a culture of continuous excellence, and maintains that standard relentlessly over time. The result is that personnel emerging from that organization at any point in the rotation cycle are performing at a level that approaches the peak other organizations achieve only through their best special selection and training efforts. The trade-off is cost. Selection is expensive. Continuous training is expensive. Assessment infrastructure is expensive. The organization is smaller than it might otherwise be, because standards for membership are high enough that fewer people qualify. But the advantage is decisive. When personnel are needed for deployment, they do not require months of assembly and preparation. They are already there. They are already operating at that level as part of their daily professional life. The operation itself succeeded. All 3 units achieved their objectives. There were no significant failures. No casualties. The engagement was effective across the board. But the after-action reflections that followed told their own story. The American commander and the commander of the Allied unit understood what they had witnessed. One nation had sent its very best through deliberate curation and intensive training. Another had done exactly the same. The third had sent whoever was next in the rotation. And the third had performed at a level that the curated best of the other 2 could match, but not exceed. The assessment that emerged wasn't that the curated units had failed, they had not. The assessment was that an organization capable of producing deployment-ready personnel without requiring a special curation process represented a different order of institutional achievement entirely. The other nations had done something hard, they had selected and trained elite teams for a specific operation. The SAS had done something harder. It had built an organization in which that process was unnecessary, because the organization's standard baseline was already there. The British had not sent their specially chosen best. They had sent whoever was available. And whoever was available happened to be what other militaries achieve only through their most deliberate and intensive special selection efforts. The question that observation raised, and that military establishments around the world continue to grapple with, concerns how to build organizations in which elite performance is the baseline rather than the peak. In which excellence is maintained as a daily organizational standard rather than achieved through periodic curation. In which the culture itself, rather than any individual training program, becomes the mechanism through which capability is sustained. The SAS suggests one answer: invest heavily in selection, maintain ruthlessly high standards, and build a culture where excellence is not negotiable. The result is an organization whose normal output is what others achieve only through their best special processes. In one sense, what happened during this operation was not a competition. 3 nations worked together toward a shared objective. Nobody won and nobody lost. But the performance differential was real enough to be observed, real enough to be discussed in after-action assessments, and real enough to prompt serious reflection about how different military cultures approach the fundamental question of excellence and how organizations can be built to sustain it. The investment model matters. The organizational structure matters. The culture matters. The standards that are maintained day after day, not just in the weeks before a deployment, but every day, every month, every year, matter more than any single selection event or training pipeline. 2 nations sent their finest through deliberate, intensive, costly selection processes. One nation sent whoever was next in line. The one that sent whoever was next in line demonstrated, in the mountains of Afghanistan, that its organizational baseline was performing at or above the peak that others reached only through their most intensive and deliberate efforts. The most effective elite forces may not be the ones assembled at the peak of selection and training. They may be the organizations in which elite is simply how the organization functions, day in, day out, rotation after rotation, because the culture demands nothing less. That is what the British SAS built. And that is what this operation, quietly and without fanfare, put on full display.